I was 17 when she said it. The whole class went silent, pencils stopped scratching paper, and even the clock seemed to pause for a second. "David, you'll never amount to anything if you keep dreaming like this," she said, her voice sharp but calm, the kind of calm that cuts deeper than shouting. I still remember the laughter that followed, the whispers, the way my cheeks burned while I tried to pretend it didn't matter. But it did. It mattered more than anything. That day something inside me shifted. I wasn't angry, not at first. I was hurt. She wasn't just my teacher. She was the one who everyone said believed in her students. The one who told us to chase our goals. But when it came to me, she decided I wasn't worth believing in. Maybe it was because I came from a broken home. Maybe because I wasn't one of the rich kids who donated to the school fund. I don't know. All I knew was that she made me feel small, and I promised myself I'd never let anyone do that again. After class, I stayed back to collect my things. She didn't even look up from her desk. I wanted to say something, maybe ask why. But instead, I just said, "Thank you." Not because I meant it, but because it was the last word I ever wanted her to remember from me. That night, I looked at my cracked ceiling and whispered to myself, one day she'll regret this. It wasn't anger that kept me awake, it was a quiet kind of fire. The kind that doesn't burn fast. The kind that lasts for years. I didn't have much when I graduated. No college offers, no money, and no plan, just that fire inside me. While most of my classmates celebrated their admissions, I spent the summer hauling boxes at a warehouse. It wasn't glamorous, but it paid enough to keep the lights on in my tiny apartment. Every night, when my hands ached and my back screamed, I'd remind myself of her words. "You'll never amount to anything." Those words became my alarm clock, my motivation, my fuel. I started reading during lunch breaks. Business books, biographies, anything I could find that talked about success. I didn't understand half of it at first, but I kept going. I learned how people built companies, how they failed, and how they got back up. Slowly, a thought started growing in my mind. Maybe I didn't need a fancy degree to make something of myself. Maybe I just needed to learn how to think differently. So I saved every dollar I could and bought a secondhand laptop. Nights turned into mornings as I taught myself coding, marketing, finance, whatever I could find for free online. My friends laughed when I said I'd start my own business someday. They said people like us weren't meant for that. But I didn't argue. I'd already heard worse. My first idea failed within 3 months. The second one didn't even make it that far. But I didn't stop. Every failure made me sharper, tougher. I learned to see rejection not as a wall but as a signpost, showing me what not to do next time. By 23, I was running a small freelance agency from my living room. I had 2 part-time employees, both younger than me, both dreaming just like I used to. And every time I paid them, I felt something shift inside. It wasn't pride. It was peace. The kind that comes from knowing you're not stuck where you started. Growth didn't come easy. At first, it felt like for every step forward, I was shoved 2 steps back. Clients disappeared without paying, projects failed, and sometimes I questioned if I was really meant for this. There were nights when I'd stare at my computer screen, the same sentence blinking for hours, wondering if my teacher had been right all along. Maybe I wasn't meant to succeed. Maybe I was just pretending to be someone I wasn't. But then I'd remember the faces of people who believed in me, my mother who worked double shifts at a diner just so I could buy that old laptop, and my best friend Ethan who once told me, "Man, you've already come too far to stop now." Those reminders pulled me back every time I fell. I started writing small goals on sticky notes and pinning them on the wall. 1 new client, 1 better website, 1 good review. Little victories. After a year of grinding, things finally started to shift. A marketing firm from New York found my portfolio online and offered me a partnership. It wasn't huge money, but it was enough to prove I was on the right track. I hired 2 more people, rented a small office, and replaced my broken chair with one that didn't squeak every time I moved. For the first time, it felt like life was listening. But success has a funny way of testing you. As work piled up, I stopped sleeping properly. My health slipped, relationships faded, and I started losing touch with why I'd begun this in the first place. I was chasing numbers, not purpose. And yet, beneath all that exhaustion, a single voice kept echoing, hers. "You'll never amount to anything." It wasn't just a memory anymore. It had become my rhythm, my drive, my silent motivator. I didn't realize it back then, but every late night, every risk, every win, I was slowly building something far bigger than just a company. By the time I turned 26, the small agency had turned into a real company. We had clients from 3 different countries, a dozen employees, and our first proper office downtown, glass walls, clean desks, a receptionist who smiled every time someone walked in. It wasn't Google, but to me it was everything. I'd built this from scratch, from the same nothing that once made me a joke. Still, success didn't feel like I thought it would. I'd imagined fireworks, relief, maybe even pride. But instead it was quiet. Every milestone only made me look at the next one. Every paycheck made me remember the days I couldn't afford lunch. And every time I walked into that office, I felt both gratitude and guilt, because I knew the boy who once sat in that classroom would have been proud, but the man I'd become wasn't sure how to stop chasing more. There were times I'd pass by the old school on my way to meetings. The building hadn't changed, same walls, same gate, same garden where I used to sit alone during lunch. I'd slow down just enough to see the students rushing inside, and a strange mix of nostalgia and anger would hit me. I wondered if she was still there, teaching someone else that dreams had limits. One afternoon, I got an invitation to speak at a youth entrepreneurship seminar, the same event where she had once been the guest speaker years ago. For a moment I thought about saying no. Facing a crowd didn't scare me anymore, but facing my past did. Still, something inside whispered go. When I walked onto that stage, the applause hit me like a wave. I told them about failure, about doubt, about how sometimes the world doesn't believe in you, but you go on anyway. I didn't mention her name, but I didn't have to. Somewhere in that crowd, a few teachers looked at me the same way she once did, but this time, I wasn't the student anymore. I was proof that belief can grow even in the hardest soil. The company grew faster than I ever imagined. Within 3 years, we had branches in 3 cities, partnerships with global firms, and investors who actually returned my calls. The same people who once ignored my emails now asked for meetings. It was surreal, like living in a dream I'd once scribbled on a napkin. But growth brings weight. Every success carried a new kind of pressure. I barely saw my family, barely slept, and my mind never stopped running. I'd wake up at 3 a.m. thinking about deadlines, clients, expansion plans. Somewhere between ambition and exhaustion, I lost the simple joy that once kept me going. My days became numbers, targets, and spreadsheets. Then came the betrayal. One of my senior managers, someone I trusted like a brother, siphoned off funds from a major client project. By the time I found out, it had already hit the news. The headlines questioned my leadership. The investors panicked. Overnight, I went from being the face of success to the man who should have known better. I remember sitting alone in my office that night. The city lights flickered outside the window, but inside, it was dark and heavy. For the first time in years, I felt like that 17-year-old kid again, lost, humiliated, and blamed for something he didn't deserve. The same words echoed in my mind, soft but sharp. You'll never amount to anything. But instead of breaking me, it grounded me. I realized I'd spent years proving her wrong, not for myself but for her. My success wasn't mine. It was built on anger, on revenge disguised as ambition. That night, I promised myself I'd start over, not to prove anything, but to become the kind of man I could respect. The next morning, I called an emergency meeting. No excuses, no denial. I told my team the truth, took responsibility, and began rebuilding the trust we'd lost. Some people left. Others stayed. But those who stayed became my foundation, the kind that doesn't crumble when tested. Rebuilding wasn't easy, it never is. The scandal had bruised our reputation and money was tight again. For a while it felt like all those years of effort had vanished overnight. But this time I wasn't fueled by anger. I was fueled by something quieter, steadier, the understanding that mistakes don't define you, how you rise from them does. I sold my car, downsized my apartment, and moved my office back into a small rented space. Most people would have called it a failure, but to me it was a restart. I wasn't chasing headlines anymore, I was chasing honesty. Every deal we made after that was transparent. Every client we took on was treated like a partner, not a transaction. Slowly the company began to breathe again, smaller, humbler, but stronger. Around that time I started mentoring young entrepreneurs. I'd meet them at coffee shops, listen to their struggles, and help them avoid the mistakes I once made. There was something deeply healing about it, watching others grow not because you want credit but because you know what it's like to have no one believe in you. I also started visiting my old neighborhood. It had changed but the faces hadn't. Kids still played on cracked sidewalks, mothers still stretched their paychecks to survive. I began sponsoring small scholarships for students who couldn't afford college. No fancy announcements, just quiet support. One afternoon, while reviewing applications, I paused at a familiar handwriting on a recommendation letter. It was from my old school. My heart skipped. The signature at the bottom read, Mrs. Porter. My teacher. The same woman whose words had once haunted me. For a moment I just stared at the name. It felt like a ghost had slipped through time and found me again. I didn't know then that this small moment would soon turn into something much bigger, a twist that life had been quietly preparing all along. A few weeks later, my assistant walked into my office with a puzzled look. "David, there's a new applicant for the marketing director position," she said. "You might want to see this one yourself." I barely looked up until she placed the resume on my desk. The name at the top froze me mid-breath. Margaret Porter. My old teacher. The woman who told me I'd never succeed. For a few seconds I just stared at the paper, the black ink blurring as old memories crashed back all at once. The classroom, the laughter, her voice cutting through the noise. I leaned back in my chair, half in disbelief, half in silence. She was applying here to my company. The irony was almost poetic. Life had completed a perfect circle, but I didn't feel the satisfaction I thought I would. No rush of revenge, no surge of pride. Just stillness. My assistant asked softly, "Should I reject it?" I hesitated. Part of me wanted to say yes, to end it right there, but something stopped me. "No," I said quietly. "Call her in for an interview." The following Monday she walked into the office. Older now, her hair streaked with gray, eyes tired but still sharp. For a second she didn't recognize me. Then her gaze froze, confusion flickering into realization. Her voice trembled slightly. "David?" I smiled politely. "Good morning, Mrs. Porter. Please have a seat." She looked around the room, the glass walls, the logo on the far wall, my name engraved on the desk. Her lips parted slightly, like she wanted to say something but couldn't. I watched her eyes as she pieced it all together. The boy she once doubted now sat behind the desk she wanted to work for. I could have reminded her of what she said. I could have made her feel small. But instead, I just listened as she spoke about her experience, her recent struggles, her reasons for wanting the job. Life had already delivered its lesson. I didn't need to. As she spoke, I noticed the cracks behind her practiced smile. She talked about how schools had downsized, how teaching had changed, how she'd been let go after nearly 20 years. Her voice carried the same confidence as before, but her hands trembled slightly when she reached for the glass of water on my desk. "I've been trying to start fresh," she said softly. "It's not easy at my age. The world moves faster than I can keep up sometimes." For a moment, I didn't see the woman who once crushed my confidence. I saw a tired human being, someone who had also been broken by life in her own way. Time humbles everyone, even those who once stood on pedestals. I leaned forward slightly. "Why this company?" I asked. She paused. "Because I've heard it's a place that gives people a second chance." Her words hit me like a quiet storm. I had built this company to prove people wrong, but somewhere along the way, it had become something better. A place that believed in redemption. I thought about the boy I once was, the one who would have given anything for someone to believe in him. Now I had the power to do that for someone else. When the interview ended, she stood up, hesitated, then said, "I know you probably remember me, and if you do, I just want to say I'm sorry. I was wrong." Sometimes we say things we shouldn't, and we don't realize how deep they go until years later. There it was, the apology I'd once dreamed of hearing. But it didn't feel like victory. It felt like closure. I smiled genuinely this time. "We all say things we regret, Mrs. Porter. What matters is that we grow beyond them." She nodded slowly, eyes glistening, then walked out of the office. I sat there for a long time, staring at the resume still on my desk. The words Margaret Porter no longer hurt. They reminded me how far I'd come, and how forgiving doesn't make you weaker, it frees you. That evening, long after everyone had left the office, I sat in the dim glow of my desk lamp staring at her resume again. I couldn't shake the feeling that life had just handed me a test, one that wasn't about money, power, or revenge. It was about who I had become. Hiring her wouldn't change my past. It wouldn't erase those years of pain or the nights I spent proving her wrong. But rejecting her for the sake of pride would make me no better than the person she once was. I had spent half my life trying to rise above her words. Maybe this was the moment to prove I finally had. I signed the offer letter. Not out of pity, not to make a point, but because I believed in second chances. The same belief I once wished someone had for me. The next morning, when she walked back into my office, her face was tense, expecting rejection. I handed her the envelope and said, "Welcome to the team." For a moment she just stared at it, her lips trembling, eyes wide. "You're serious?" she whispered. I nodded. "We all start somewhere. This is yours." Her eyes filled with tears she quickly tried to hide. "Thank you," she said, her voice breaking. As she left, I leaned back in my chair and exhaled slowly. For the first time in years I felt lighter, not because I'd won but because I'd let go. The past no longer held me, it had taught me. Over the next few weeks she worked quietly and respectfully, never overstepping, never bringing up the past again. She wasn't the same woman I remembered, and maybe I wasn't the same boy either. Sometimes life doesn't give you revenge, it gives you perspective. I used to think success was about proving people wrong. But sitting there watching her thank the interns and stay late to help the new team, I realized, true success is when you no longer need to. Weeks passed and something inside me began to shift. Watching her work every day was like seeing a piece of my past quietly walking through the halls. She was humble now, patient, softer somehow. She greeted everyone with respect, even the interns who were half her age. The same woman who once stood in front of a classroom with authority now listened more than she spoke. It was strange and humbling to witness. One evening I stayed late to finish some reports. Through the glass wall, I saw her still at her desk, helping one of the junior designers fix a presentation. She looked up, caught my eye, and smiled faintly, not the teacher's smile I remembered but one that said thank you. And that was the moment it hit me. Life had come full circle, not as punishment but as grace. I thought about the years I'd wasted trying to outrun my past. Every sleepless night, every sacrifice, every lonely victory, all of it rooted in proving someone wrong. But now I realized something far deeper. Success built on bitterness will always feel empty. Only when it's built on purpose does it give peace. That night as I left the office I paused by the wall of photos. Pictures of our team, our milestones, our first office. In the reflection of the glass I saw the boy I used to be, scared, angry, unsure. I smiled at him. We made it, I whispered silently. And we did it our way. The next morning I gathered my team. We're changing something, I said. From now on every year, we'll sponsor 10 students from public schools. Not because it looks good in reports, but because someone out there is hearing the same words I once did. And they need to know they can prove them wrong. Applause filled the room. Even she smiled, her eyes glistening with quiet pride. In that moment I finally understood, forgiveness isn't about the other person. It's about freeing yourself to become who you were always meant to be. Years later, I sometimes found myself thinking back to that day, the interview, her trembling hands, the quiet apology. Time had moved on, but the lesson remained etched in me. Life isn't a ladder you climb to get even. It's a circle that keeps bringing you face to face with yourself. The company had grown beyond anything I once imagined. We weren't just another business anymore. We'd become a community, one that believed in second chances. Former dropouts, single parents, people who had been told you're not good enough. They worked here, built here, thrived here. I made sure of it. Because every one of them reminded me of the kid I used to be. Mrs. Porter stayed with the company for 3 years. She wasn't perfect, but she was dedicated. She treated every young intern like her own student, patient, encouraging, humble. I'd often catch her smiling at the scholarship wall, the one with photos of the students we helped each year. I knew what she was thinking, that life had given her a chance to rewrite her story too. One day before she retired, she left a handwritten note on my desk. Read, "You taught me what I once failed to teach you, that success isn't about being right, it's about being kind. Thank you for the lesson." I kept that note framed on my office shelf. Whenever someone asked about it, I'd just smile and say, it's a reminder that words can either build or break someone. Choose carefully. Looking back now, I realize the best revenge was never success. It was peace. The kind that comes from forgiving what hurt you and growing beyond it. Because in the end, the world doesn't remember who doubted you. It remembers what you did after they did. And maybe, just maybe, that's what true victory really means. It was a rainy afternoon when I met him. A shy, quiet boy named Alex who'd come for an internship interview. He was nervous, barely making eye contact, his voice trembling as he spoke about his dream of becoming an entrepreneur. I saw something in him instantly, the same uncertainty, the same spark I once carried. After the interview, as he was about to leave, he turned back and said softly, "Sir, my teacher told me I'm not smart enough to run a company someday, but I just want to try." Those words hit me like a reflection in time. I smiled. "Sit down, Alex," I said. "Let me tell you a story." I told him about a boy who was once told the exact same thing. About nights filled with doubt and mornings that started before dawn. About a teacher who didn't believe in him, and how years later that teacher came back asking for a chance. His eyes widened, disbelief written all over his face. "So what happened?" he asked eagerly. "I gave her the job," I replied. "Because success isn't about proving them wrong, it's about proving yourself right." He sat in silence for a moment, then smiled, the kind of smile that carries hope. I hired him that day not because he was the most qualified but because I knew what it felt like to need just one person to believe in you. Months later he became one of our best interns, full of ideas, full of fire. Every time I saw him in the office I felt proud, not just of him but of how far life had brought me. That day as I watched the rain slide down the window, I realized something simple yet profound. We don't get to choose who doubts us, but we do get to choose what we do with that doubt. Some let it break them. Others use it to build something that lasts forever. And maybe, that's the only revenge worth taking. Years later, I started speaking at universities and small community events, not as some self-made success story, but as someone who had once fallen, failed, and found his way through persistence and grace. I always began with the same line: someone once told me I'd never succeed. Every time, I saw faces lift, eyes widen, because almost everyone had heard those same words in some form. People don't realize how powerful words can be, how a single sentence can build or destroy someone's belief in themselves. I used to think the cruel words hurt the most, but over time I learned that silence, when no one believes in you, hurts even deeper. That's why I made it my mission to make sure no one in my company ever felt unseen. Whether it was a janitor, a developer, or an intern, everyone mattered. When Mrs. Porter passed away a few years after retiring, her daughter sent me a message. She said her mother often talked about me, how she was proud to have worked for me, how grateful she was that life had given her a chance to make things right. I sat in my office for a long time after reading that, thinking about how strange life is. The person who once tried to break me ended up being one of the biggest reasons I became who I was. I went to her funeral quietly. No one recognized me and I didn't want them to. I just stood at the back, watching as her former students and colleagues shared stories about her kindness, her patience, how much she'd changed in her later years. It made me realize, we're all learning always. Even teachers. Even the ones who hurt us. When I walked out, the sun had just begun to peek through the clouds. I looked up and smiled. Not out of victory but out of peace. Because in the end, the greatest lesson she ever gave me wasn't in a classroom. It was in forgiveness. Years passed and life found its rhythm again. The company kept growing but my focus had shifted entirely. I no longer chased expansion, I chased impact. Every year we added more scholarships, more mentorship programs, more opportunities for kids who reminded me of that boy sitting alone in the back of the classroom, trying to believe he could still make it. Sometimes I'd visit schools quietly without telling anyone who I was. I'd sit at the back of classrooms and watch students dream out loud, some shy, some bold, some uncertain, but all full of potential. Once after a talk, a young girl ran up to me and said, "My teacher says I'm too quiet to lead." I smiled, kneeling down to meet her eyes. "Then lead quietly," I told her. "The world needs leaders who listen." I could see in her eyes the same flicker I once carried, that fragile, beautiful spark of defiance. And in that moment, I realized my story wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about rewriting the cycle. Making sure doubt ended with me, not passed down to the next generation. Back at the office, the framed note from Mrs. Porter still sat on my shelf, slightly faded but full of meaning. Every time I looked at it, I remembered that people can change. Sometimes too late, sometimes just in time. And maybe, just maybe, that's how the world heals, one changed heart at a time. One evening, standing by my window, I watched the city lights stretch far into the distance. It reminded me of all the paths I'd walked, the pain, the anger, the forgiveness. Everything had led here. Success had given me a voice, but forgiveness had given me peace. I whispered to myself, we're all someone's lesson. The question is, what kind? And with that, I turned off the office lights, leaving behind not just a company but a legacy, one built on kindness, redemption, and the courage to believe when no one else does. Years later, when I finally decided to step down and hand the company over to the next generation, they threw a small farewell ceremony, nothing fancy, just family, employees, and a few old friends who'd been there since the beginning. As I looked around the room, I saw faces that told 1,000 stories, people who had once been lost but found their place here. Each of them, in some way, carried a piece of my journey. Alex was there too, no longer the nervous intern but the confident new CEO. When he took the stage, he smiled and said, "You once told me the best revenge is peace." I didn't understand it then. I do now. The room fell silent for a moment before breaking into applause. And I just sat there, smiling. It wasn't pride I felt, it was gratitude. Gratitude that life had allowed me to witness the full circle close perfectly. After the event, I walked through the empty halls of the office one last time. The same corridors that had once echoed with my ambition now felt like home, a home built not on success but on purpose. My eyes landed on the scholarship wall, dozens of smiling faces, students from across the country whose dreams we had quietly helped build. Above them, in small engraved letters, were the words I had chosen years ago. Believe in those who don't yet believe in themselves. I traced the words with my hand, and for a moment, I imagined that 17-year-old boy again, tired, scared, but full of stubborn hope. I smiled at him. "We did it," I whispered. "And we did it right." As I stepped outside, the sun was setting, the same golden hue that once filled my office when Mrs. Porter walked in all those years ago. I looked up at the sky, feeling the warmth on my face, and said quietly, "Thank you for everything." Because in the end, life had given me the sweetest revenge of all: peace, purpose, and the strength to forgive. And that was worth everything.